The Floyd of Rosedale is coming back home to its home state, to its birth state, and the Iowa Hawkeyes did it in typical Iowa Hawkeye fashion, running the football and owning trench warfare.
From LA to Piscataway, all Big Ten all year long. This is Big Ten 10.
Both head coaches talked about it in the lead up to this particular football game. I featured those comments on the preview. Whoever wins the trenches is going to win this football game. You got to play well at the line of scrimmage. You got to play well on the offensive line. You got to play well on the defensive line, right? This is that traditional Big Ten matchup where you maybe don't have as much skill on the outside, but it's all about playing well between the tackles in this particular game. And we saw Iowa get better and better and better and better as this game went on. First half, we saw Minnesota play pretty well in some parts of this game. Once we got into the second half, the Iowa Hawkeyes really started to wear down and wear down and wear down Minnesota, specifically on their defensive line and specifically on their defensive side of the football. And it's typical Iowa Hawkeye fashion. Run the ball, stop the run, win the turnover battle. Look, it's very simple football. Kirk Ferentz has made a living on winning those very specific battles, keeping things simple and mastering those things. And you saw it in this game. You've seen it in many games over the years. That's how Iowa plays football. The difference between maybe the last few years and this year, though, is they've got some explosion, and they still have some explosion on offense in the form of Mr. Kaleb Johnson. He runs wild yet again. I touched on it in my preview. Corey Heatherman and this Minnesota defense. You had one job. You had one goal. One thing you had to do. You had to come up to the line of scrimmage. You had to find a way to contain this run game. You knew you weren't going to stop Kaleb Johnson, right? This offensive line, I think, was playing with too much confidence, with too much momentum up front, that you were going to halt him for less than 100 yards. Well, not only did Kaleb get 100 yards, he got 100 more than that, right? He got over 200 yards in this specific football game against the Minnesota defense. I thought Minnesota was doing a decent job defensively in the first half. Iowa, it took them a little bit, really, to get into rhythm in this particular football game. But once Kaleb Johnson gets going, man, it is so fun to watch. It is so fun to watch. And we're going to talk about trench warfare here in just a little bit and how good that this offensive line is at paving the way for Kaleb, right? You know, I love what they do from a zone blocking perspective and allow Kaleb to find the seam in the defense. And once he finds that seam, boy, and once he gets downhill, once he gets that 3 yards and once he gets through that first level in the hole, okay, you saw in this game where Minnesota players come up to the line of scrimmage and they try to make those tackles, and he just busts through arm tackles, right? He is such a fun running back. He's such a fun running back to watch, and I think Iowa does just enough with what they have, what else they have on offense, to really set up Kaleb Johnson to also have explosive runs. I talked about it in my Michigan and USC reaction as well. It's patience. I think that's another thing, is patience, that if you stick with it, if you really hone in on it and you really say, this is what we're going to do, this is our philosophy, this is what we're going to be committed to, eventually you're going to see Kaleb Johnson start to wear down a defense, 2, 3, 4 yards, and eventually it's going to be 40 yards. Eventually it's going to be 50 yards, and that's what you saw happen in the second half. Now, I think a contributing part to how Iowa was able to pull away in the second half of this football game in Minneapolis is kind of what they were doing on the offensive side of the football. Okay, let's talk about how aggressive they were throwing the ball early. You maybe saw, in the first quarter, early second quarter kind of thing, Max Brosmer kind of took him a little bit, right, to get in a rhythm. We kind of go back to that North Carolina game. Now, North Carolina game, it took him like 3 quarters, really, and then in the fourth quarter, he was really starting to get into rhythm. But once this game got into the second quarter, mid-second quarter, especially late in the second quarter, right, when they were able to put some touchdown drives together, this was starting to look pretty good for Minnesota. But they were really, Greg Harbaugh and this Golden Gopher offense was really leaning into the throw game. Now, when I look at Minnesota offensively, Okay, I think Max Brosmer is an improvement over Ethan Kaliakmanis. I think they've got decent talent at the wide receiver position, but I don't think I'm going to get a lot of argument, whether you're a Minnesota Golden Gopher fan or you're not a Minnesota Golden Gopher fan. Your best player is number one in maroon and gold. Your best player is Darius Taylor. Let me throw some numbers at you. Now, of course, he was not able to play for North Carolina. So 3 games, 188 yards in 3 games. Well, and you have one of the Big Ten's best running backs in the backfield, and Nevada and Rhode Island are some of your opponents. I feel like maybe you should have a little bit more than that. Okay, I'll just say that right off the bat. In this game, Max Brosmer threw the ball 37 times. Darius Taylor rushed it 10 times for 34 yards. So that balance was a little bit off. I know you got to try to throw the ball to get back into the game, in that second half. But I'm even looking at some of these play calls in the first half, and maybe they feel like they can't get that push against Iowa up front on their offensive line. We talk about trench warfare and winning that battle. Okay, if Minnesota doesn't have the confidence in their interior offensive line to create some of those holes, then they're going to revert back to the pass game. That goes to winning trenches in this particular matchup, right? Sometimes it's a psychological thing. Sometimes it's a play calling type of thing as well. So that was kind of a little bit perplexing to me and how they did that. But that's just where I'm coming from. Maybe there's something that I'm not aware of right now as to why they're calling it the way they're calling it. Like historically, the last few years, you look at Minnesota, and this is a team that wants to be fairly physical. Coming into the year, I thought, okay, you're upgrading at quarterback certainly with Max Brosmer, but this is an offense that's still going to run the ball. They're still going to be physical, but they're going to be better throwing off of play action, throwing off of what they're doing in the run game. Now it's a little bit backwards to me, but that's just the way I see it. If there's something I'm missing, please leave it in the comments below. I would be happy to hear it and would happy to hear from you. All right. And then Iowa, right? That pass rush really got them off rhythm. They figured some things out at halftime. And once they were able to get that pass rush in and affecting what Max Brosmer wanted to do and the rhythm that he was able to get earlier on in the football game, you had short possessions from Iowa and you kept your defense. That was where this one really, for me, where you really started to see the Iowa Hawkeyes start to really wear down Minnesota. When that Iowa pass rush was able to disrupt things for Minnesota, you had short offensive possessions, and then that defense was out there gashing runs on the defense, really hurt their confidence, and they were out there for a long, long time. And that Iowa, man, when those Iowa Hawkeyes really start to haul in there, that's when a defense can really get worn down. You see a lot of hands on hips. You see a lot of that kind of thing. And that's what you saw in this particular matchup. And Iowa winning the trenches. Right? They really focused in on that in the second half, and they really wore down the Minnesota Golden Gophers in this particular football game as well. Let's take a look at the box score. Of course, final score, 31-14, Iowa. The final tally for Kaleb Johnson, 21 carries, 206 yards, and 3 touchdowns. A lot of explosive runs on the ground for them. And it's a simple formula for Iowa, and it just works. They have mastered it. They have perfected that simple formula, and I think it's been very basic, and of course they've really leaned on that defense in the past, but now you look at this offense and it's taken a step up because of the explosiveness right now that they have in the run game. I want to talk about Minnesota for just a minute because I could sit here and talk about Iowa, but I'd probably be saying the same thing a lot, right? Run the ball, play good defense, discipline, don't commit a lot of penalties, right? It's fairly simple. You look at the schedule coming up for Iowa. Yeah, it looks pretty good. If they keep doing what they're doing, they're probably going to have a lot of success. But you look at Minnesota, okay? You lose to North Carolina to kick off the season. And now you lose this. This was such a swing game. And I said it a couple of weeks ago. This was such a swing game in this game against Iowa. All of a sudden, you built momentum with wins over Rhode Island and Nevada. And now you were taking on a good team, right? You were able to beat up on maybe lesser competition. It didn't maybe go as well against North Carolina. That's not looking like the best close loss as of right now, considering they let up 70 in a football game, not a basketball game against James Madison. So now all of a sudden you look at this Minnesota team. They're sitting there at 2-2. You got beat down by your rival. Okay? Now you're sitting there, 2 wins, and 2 losses on the season. And you look at what's coming up from Minnesota. They got to go on the road to Michigan. You want to talk about a team that runs the football? Michigan ran it down USC's throat. Iowa was able to establish that run game and wear down Minnesota. We'll see what Michigan can do at the Big House. And then you got to play USC, right? Those are 2 games that I don't exactly feel confident about right now. So there's a possibility halfway through the season, probably a strong possibility, halfway through the season, the Golden Gophers are sitting there with a 2-4 record, and there's the potential, not saying it will happen, but there's a potential for this thing to start to spiral downward for Minnesota. After those 2 games, you're looking at on the road at Illinois, on the road at Rutgers. You got Penn State at home the week before you play Wisconsin. So the schedule is not doing Minnesota any favors considering what this team is looking like right now. We'll see if they can right the ship here in the near future. I want to hear what you guys think. Iowa looking strong. That run game is running downhill. How successful do you think the Hawkeyes can be really riding this style where Cade McNamara, he's not doing a whole lot right now. The floor has been raised at quarterback, but man, the ceiling of this run game continues to go up and up and up. How sustainable do you think it is? And what about Minnesota? How concerned are you for the Golden Gophers right now? 2 losses on the season. A lot of games may be coming up where they will be the Vegas dog. Leave all your thoughts, Floyd of Rosedale game, in the comments below. It's coming back to Iowa City. I'm Big Ten Ted. We will see you in the next one.
Thanks for watching Big Ten Ted, where it's all Big Ten all year long. Make sure to like the video to spread the word of Big Ten Ted to the masses, and subscribe to the channel for updates on Big Ten content that drops every day.